Welcome, scholars, to 1.2 Political Ideologies Part 1. Please pause while we write down our objectives. They are: what is a political ideology? We're going to look at the philosophical differences between liberals and conservatives, talk a little bit about the traditional left-right political spectrum, go a little bit deeper and talk about some of those basic social and economic differences, and then lastly talk about alternatives to that linear left-right traditional political spectrum. So let's start with what is a political ideology. An ideology is simply a set of beliefs or ideas that are held by a group of people. In our country, most people would identify themselves as probably either liberals or conservatives. Liberals being the party of Democrats and conservatives being the party of Republicans. And we would differentiate liberals and conservatives in a couple basic ways. One would be their beliefs about change versus tradition. Another would be to what degree they believe mankind is capable of constant improvement and reform versus tainted by original sin, and to what degree government should be a part of our lives versus as small as possible. Now, one thing to consider is that our founding fathers, when they created the Declaration of Independence and wrote the Constitution, were classic liberals. For their time period, they were pretty radical. But if we consider them today, the world has increasingly become more liberal over time, and we would actually view the founding fathers as more at home probably in the Republican Party today as opposed to the Democratic Party. And that's, again, because the world has increasingly become more liberal over time. Now, to make things less complicated, we're not going to be talking about the past, we'll be talking about the present, and we're not going to be talking about global systems yet. We're just going to be talking about modern America today. Tomorrow we'll talk a little bit more about different global systems. So most of you have probably seen or heard of a traditional political spectrum, a traditional left-right political spectrum. You've probably heard the terms left and right. Those terms originally came from the French Revolution, when those in the National Assembly that were in favor of restoring the monarchy sat on the right, and those that were anti-monarchy sitting on the left. Again, most Democrats and Republicans today in the United States would be liberals or conservatives. You can see that as you go further left on the political spectrum, you get into socialist realm and communism on the far left, and then on the right, increasingly reactionary and fascist on the right. But the vast majority of Americans would fall into that liberal conservative camp. Here's a graph showing how America is recently trending in terms of its ideological views. If you pause and take a look, one thing that you'll note is that most Americans actually consider themselves center or center-right. We are actually a center-right country. More Americans would actually identify themselves as slightly conservative as opposed to slightly liberal. Okay, so let's talk about some of those social beliefs of liberals and conservatives. Liberals generally believe in society and mankind's ability to constantly improve. They believe in reform. How can we change this and make it better? They also believe that government can and should be used as a tool to improve people's lives. However, when it comes to people's personal affairs and privacy rights, they believe that government should largely stay out. So generally speaking, in terms of social beliefs, liberals would favor more liberty over more security, more freedom from government intrusion as opposed to more government involvement. Conservatives generally believe that tradition is important, and they tend to be skeptical of constant attempts to socially engineer a more perfect society. They think that government often makes things worse when it intervenes. They believe that some social behaviors need to be regulated, so they're going to be more likely to criminalize things like marijuana and prostitution and things along those lines, to regulate people's more personal affairs. So they would generally tend to favor more security in society over individual freedom. In terms of economic beliefs of liberals and conservatives, liberals generally believe that the economy and business need regulation. They believe that the government should play an active role in the economy. They believe entitlement programs like Social Security and Medicare are overall net positives for people. They believe that those programs and services provided by the government improve people's lives. They believe that corporations and the wealthy should pay more in taxes. They believe in progressive tax rates. The rich should be taxed at higher rates than the poor. And they would also favor, generally speaking, more economic security over economic freedom, providing more security in the realms of unemployment and in terms of retirement than a laissez-faire approach. Conservatives generally believe in the free market, that the more the government intervenes, the worse the outcomes. They believe that government tends to be inefficient, and that taxation and regulation on businesses saps profit and ultimately slows economic growth. They then tend to be opposed to the expansion of entitlement programs like Social Security and Medicare because they cost too much, and they also have a negative impact on individual initiative and accountability. Therefore, they believe in small government and low taxes. A term you might have heard of before is laissez-faire. They believe in a more laissez-faire approach to the economy. So they would generally tend to favor economic freedom over economic security. So once we start to understand that liberals are all about the government getting involved in the economy, but socially want the government to stay out, and that conservatives are the opposite, we realize that the linear left-right political spectrum starts to break down. For example, where would you find a home for someone on the left-right political spectrum who, for example, was pro-choice but also pro-gun? They wouldn't be able to find a home there. A more nuanced approach is looking at a model like this. This has 4 different quadrants in it, and it's got an XY axis. On the X-axis is the degree of economic freedom. On the left, you would have total economic equality or total government involvement and control over the economy, and on the right, total economic freedom. And then the Y-axis is about social freedoms. The more up you go on the Y-axis, the less freedom, and the more freedom, the further south you go. This way, the Bernie Sanders of the world can find a home up there in that top left quadrant. The Rand Pauls and the Tea Party folks can find a home down there in the libertarian quadrant, and it just makes a little bit more sense. When you take your political ideology quiz, you're going to be plotted on a spectrum very similar to this, which, like I said, adds a little bit more nuance and complexity to our understanding. As always, I hope you took good notes, and please bring any questions to class.